In reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process, educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior.
My name is Charlotte Thompson-Iserbaid, and I served as Senior Policy Advisor in the United States Department of Education under the Reagan administration, during which I had access to all of the most important documents for the restructuring of not only American education but global education. And I'm also the author of The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which gets into all of this, gives the background of what I saw not only in the Department of Education but as a local school board member. There was a big book that came with the in-service training called Innovations in Education, A Change Agent's Guide. Case studies, true case studies of educators who had put programs in that normally, in a normal American town, nobody would want them. How did they manage to get them in? How did they con the people? I was trained to identify the resistors and to go up against them, and actually to go and try to get them to join us through the group process system, make them feel important, get them on a committee. And when that just blew my mind. They always call everybody by the first name. You have to get very, affectionate with people and say, William, I'm so glad you've come to this meeting, and I understand your concerns about this program because, I've had other people, usually it's the really bright people in the community who have these concerns, and would you like to join our group? Not only was I trained to identify the resistors, I was trained to go to the important people, high-profile, highly thought-of people in the community, go to them and convince them of the importance of these new programs. When you can get the leadership in a community to go along with it, then the newspaper comes in and says, a committee's been set up. So I was taught really how to con the community. When I went and I saw that Americans were being trained to identify resistors, then I got pretty upset. Professor Benjamin Bloom is probably the most important behavioral psychologist ever to live. I mean, maybe not quite as much as Pavlov and Skinner, but he really implemented the system in education in the United States. And he was the author of the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. All teachers have to go through that, Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom said the purpose of education, and I often say this to parents, really listen to this. You think the purpose of education is reading, writing, and arithmetic? The purpose of education is to change the thoughts, actions, and feelings of students. He defines good teaching, and this is even worse from the parental standpoint, as challenging the student's fixed beliefs. He says that he can take a student from here to there, from a belief in God or his country or whatever, to being an atheist and not believing in his country in 1 hour. He does it. And I've seen it with students. I've seen it with young people. And they don't even know, and teachers don't even know. That's why if you talk to teachers about it often, they'll really have an awfully hard time dealing with it. Common unity, that's what we call it, common unity. There's no role for the individual in the community, and for everything that goes on in the Soviet Union or communism is based on the community, the commune.
Not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation. This was my instruction. Try to get into large circulation, established conservative media. Filthy rich movie makers, intellectuals, so-called academic circles, cynical, egocentric people who can look into your eyes with angelic expression and tell you a lie. The process, which is legitimate, overt, and open, you can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. It's a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. Marxism-Leninism ideology.
Psychological warfare has been waged against America for much of this century. This war for the mind of the public has been facilitated by the emergence of mass media and the transformation of American education by behavioral psychologists. In the book 1984, George Orwell warned that people were in danger of losing their human qualities and freedom of mind without being aware of it while it was happening because of psychological, emotional, and intellectual manipulation. Mind control. The most effective way to protect yourself from subconscious manipulation is by being aware of how it works. What the conscious mind believes, the subconscious acts on. It works like programming a computer. Information is fed into a computer, and the computer acts on it. However, if the information fed into the computer is wrong, it still acts on it. If a person believes something that is not true, the memory banks of the subconscious mind do not correct the error, but act on it. The theory of cognitive dissonance holds that the mind automatically and involuntarily rejects information not in line with previously accepted thoughts and beliefs. Many of the things that people believe are never questioned, especially when the information has come from a reliable source. It becomes easy to lose sight of why people believe some of the things that they do. People can be led to believe something that is not true when that information is carefully timed and presented by an accepted and respected authority. The purpose of propaganda is to direct public attention to certain facts.
The whole art consists in doing this so skillfully that everyone will be convinced that the fact is real,
wrote Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. To be effective, propaganda must constantly short-circuit all conscious thinking and operate on the individual subconsciously. The principles behind the big lie of propaganda: distraction and repetition. Distraction focuses the attention of the conscious mind on one or more of the five senses in order to stop conscious thinking, thus producing a state of mind that is similar to daydreaming. Watching television often produces an altered state of consciousness. It is in this state of mind where one is the most receptive to mental programming. Whether or not the information takes hold in the mind depends on two factors: trust in the source of the information and repetition of the message. Trust in the source of the information induces acceptance of the message as true, even if it is not understood. Repetition of the message embeds it in the subconscious so that acceptance of its truth and accuracy becomes a conditioned response. Thus, this information will be accepted as true without thinking about it whenever it is presented again. Subliminal perception is the process whereby you receive and respond to visual and sound information without being aware of it. When you do not hear the message clearly, you cannot make the conscious choice to accept or reject it. When you cannot make that choice, or when that choice is taken away from you, the message is programmed to your subconscious without your being aware of it. Repetition of the message constitutes mental programming. In time, the effects of this kind of programming will appear. These effects can be physical, psychological, and emotional. Every major advertising agency in North America has sponsored extensive research into subliminal perception. The capacity to lie with a picture and be undetected has been greatly enhanced by modern computer technology. Is it possible that all verbal and nonverbal communication has been identified, defined, and reduced to a code that can be manipulated? Is it possible to program an entire population to respond to certain words, images, vocal qualities, body movements, gestures, and expressions? The result of such programming would be a population that is highly suggestible, a population that can be manipulated with precision. A University of Massachusetts study of crime programs on television reveals that law enforcement officers are often shown breaking and entering illegally, failing to inform suspects of their rights, terrorizing and coercing witnesses, and accepting bribes. Constitutional guarantees are regarded as bothersome technicalities that hinder the police in the performance of their duty. Professors Katch and Ahrens, who conducted the study, said,
Police shows seem to reduce the ordinary citizen's awareness of constitutional rights and responsibilities.
The Supreme Court has consistently expanded police powers and governmental authority while curtailing individual rights. The relationship between the increase in crime and the decrease in individual rights is a classic example of the Hegelian principle of bringing about change that may entail a restriction of individual rights or some other predetermined goal, thus bringing about change that would have been impossible to impose on people without proper psychological conditioning. By causing emotional stress and mental confusion, judgment is impaired and suggestibility increased. Under these conditions, people allow their rights to be diminished without realizing its ramifications.
We're programmed today perfectly just like machines. We tie this in with the Brzezinski. Brzezinski said in 2 Ages. Now this guy was way up with the NSA. He's a master geopolitician. He admits he works in 20, 50-year periods to do with geopolitics in other countries. But he said himself, the public will shortly be unable to think or reason for themselves. It was meaning by the form of information that was given to them, the type, the formulas that were in use then in the 1970s. He says, eventually they'll be unable to think or reason for themselves. And eventually, he said, they will expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them. Well, that's happened today. A culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry. The Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. Their actors and directors were called the cultural leaders, because they would, like a computer, people are like computers, all you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call it political correctness.
And I'm sad because I know that it's hard for people like that to take an interest, a serious interest in world affairs, to take a serious interest in what their elected officials are doing. And they're not going to be really inclined to study or discover the deception that's being used against them. And so I'm sad because I see all of that in a flash in my mind as being an indication of how easy it is for the masses to be manipulated.
The greatest social messages are promoted through movies and drama, high drama, through the fixation of emotive sequences, emotional sequences, not logical, factual sequences, but pushing points across in an emotional way which register and fix in the mind. So emotional content is very, very important, rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic and facts. There's no debate. And when you're being downloaded through fiction, your guard is down, the censor part of your brain is not in action. It isn't saying, yes, I agree with this, I disagree with that, as you would in a debate or a lecture. You're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with new ideas. If it's on TV and a famous face says something, then it must be true. He doesn't have to show you facts or anything else. You've been brought up with these faces. That's why they keep these guys on television into their 70s and 80s. You've grown up with this father figure who's on television every night at 6 o'clock, in your house, in your room, staring right at you, and he's a father figure. Would he tell you a lie? And this same man will lead you through new topics. He'll introduce experts on the topics. They'll have a little summary at the end of every talk, and you are now left with the conclusion that's presented to you. You don't arrive at it, it's given to you, and it's good enough for you. That's why people today can't think outside of the programming from television. Most people still today think that all entertainment to do with movies, drama, is therefore nothing more than their entertainment. It never ever was that case. Television, as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state, around the 1960s, really, 50s and 60s, it took off. It really, really took off. And men became glued on Saturday nights to the sports shows. In their own personal lives, they were getting nowhere. They were getting disenfranchised, in a sense, as experts took over decision-making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use. H.G. Wells talked about it too. He talked about arenas. He says arenas could be put up across the world for sports, for instance. Now at that time, sports was something that children, school children were into. Adults became adults and got onto adult things. So it was unimaginable at the time that people could actually believe that there was even a need for adult sports and entertainment, never mind having arenas built across the world. But he said we can do this, and foist basically a sports culture for the males. The average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny. As the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet basically gradually becoming helpless as males through sports. Therefore, they'd have a tribal team they could identify with. We even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood. That's why we're supplied with these leaders.
Reality show. But when it became an Oprah production, it became slick. You don't have a president. You have an actor. They say that politics is show business for ugly people. You got it.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The original Constitution, I think it is an imperfect document, and I think it is a document that reflects some deep flaws in American culture, the colonial culture nascent at that time. I think we can say that the Constitution reflected an enormous blind spot in this culture, and that the framers had that same blind spot. It also reflected the fundamental flaw of this country.
Public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
My team and my specialties, information operations and the psychological arm of things, we are trained to deceive if we have to.
If you found out that your public affairs team that was showing you around actually had just completed a 40-hour course in psychological operations and was trained in psyops and in military deception, you start to question, hey, is that an appropriate use of that resource?
You shouldn't trust me. In fact, by my actually participating in that, I will taint the news.
Yes, in modern warfare, our military leaders are finding that words and ideas are highly effective weapons. Here, recruits with specialized backgrounds were taught the nature, methods, and techniques of propaganda and its dissemination. Perhaps its most rewarding form of expression is news. For news is ready-made propaganda, and to an enemy denied access to outside information, it's as welcome as food and water.
Edward Bernays. There were other earlier innovators, but none altered the social landscape of North America as profoundly. Born in Vienna, Austria in 1891, Bernays' family moved to New York City about a year after his birth. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and like his uncle, Bernays was captivated by the convoluted processes of the human mind. Bernays often consulted his uncle's work, and he was the first to incorporate psychology and other social sciences into PR. Yet where Freud sought to uncover motivations, Bernays sought to mask them, and Bernays' clients were companies rather than individuals.
In his 1928 book, Propaganda, Bernays wrote, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible
to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it."
He called it the engineering of consent.
Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country.
If you want to preserve your power indefinitely, you have to get the consent of the ruled. And this they will do, partly by drugs, as I foresaw in Brave New World, partly by these new techniques of propaganda. They will do it by bypassing the sort of rational side of man and appealing to his subconscious and his deeper emotions and his physiology even, and so making him actually love his slavery. I mean, I think this is the danger, that actually people may be in some ways happy under the new regime, but they will be happy in situations where they oughtn't to be happy.
President Woodrow Wilson formed the Committee on Public Information, or CPI, which raised support for U.S. engagement in World War I. Bernays worked for the organization, which was headed by George Creel. They briefed President Wilson, directing him in the use of propaganda. The CPI hired thousands of 4-minute men, speakers who were trained to speak about the war for 4 minutes during community events. The men at CPI believed that the average attention span was about 4 minutes. Bernays' work was successful, and the United States eventually did enter World War I. This is only one example of how PR firms can affect public opinion. The methods pioneered by Bernays have become commonplace. Bernays left an indelible mark on the cultural consciousness of the United States and the world. And though he has since passed on, his legacy remains with us today.
Psychological warfare was established as a special staff agency. This move had far-reaching results.
This isn't to say that Bernays was necessarily a bad man, just very, very good at what he did. PR agencies across the planet use Bernays techniques every day. Over 100 years since the birth of Edward Bernays, the techniques he refined have become both profoundly effective and widespread. If you're like most people, then you probably assume that you know where your opinions come from. And if you're like most people, you're probably wrong. Humans tend to think of each belief as the result of a rational analysis, but this is not entirely true. Instead, our opinions are subtly influenced in numerous ways, and we're often not aware of this process. PR firms around the world work to skew customer and civilian opinion in favor of one product, government action, or another. But who's paying them to influence you, and why?
Tyranny's always lurking just around the corner.
The international agenda today is unforgiving.
This is an ideological battle. Some people believe in globalism, others of us believe in national sovereignty. It's a contest between ideologies, whether we believe in our institutions here, our national sovereignty, our Constitution, or are we going to further move in the direction of international government, more UN? You know, this country goes to war under UN resolutions. I don't like big government in Washington. So I don't like this trend toward international government. Knowledge is out there. If we look for it, you'll realize that our national sovereignty is under threat. The CFR exists, the Trilateral Commission exists. These are real things. It's not somebody made these up. It's not a conspiracy. They don't talk about it, and they might not admit about it.
Ruling Class Journalists, written by Richard Harwood, describes the CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States. The Washington Post article boasted that news reporters who are CFR members do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Now, here are the aims for the United States. 1. Greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2. Higher and then much higher taxes. 3. An increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4. Wild inflation of our currency. 5. Government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6. Greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied, naturally and automatically, by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7. Far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. 8. The steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9. A constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace. Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
It's a contest between ideologies. This is an ideological battle. Some people believe in globalism. Others of us believe in national sovereignty. It's not so much as a sinister conspiracy. It's just knowledge is out there. If we look for it, you'll realize that our national sovereignty is under threat.
Congressman Paul, thank you.
Ask yourselves in all honesty, what on earth is wrong with the United States simply minding its own business? This includes our resolution to get us out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of the United States. We should withdraw all American troops from every spot on earth that is not American soil, except when and where such troops may be required as decided by Congress to protect American lives and property. We must once again make our money freely redeemable in gold. We must take all practicable legislative steps to prevent a recurrence of the enormous thievery and other subversive crimes that have been perpetrated on the American people through a contrived inflation by every president from Franklin Roosevelt through Richard Nixon.
The psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America.
What if the Constitution no longer applied? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right?
He will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation.
What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave?